Once upon a time, kids hockey was about backyard rinks and hand-me-down skates. Today, not so much. Today, it's about tournaments all over the province and composite sticks that cost $300 a piece. As minor hockey lost its way, let's get into this. In Calgary, Alberta, Todd Miller, former president of Hockey Calgary and author of Moron, the behind-the-scenes story of minor hockey. And Paul Carson, that's him on the right. He's vice president of hockey development at Hockey Canada. And with us here in studio, Michael Trakos. He is national hockey writer at Postmedia News. And Teresa Dosteler, who's got the website CanadianHockeyMoms.ca, and she's got 3 kids in the game as well. And we're grateful that all of you could join us on TVO tonight for this discussion. Let's get a view from the front lines. Teresa, where did you start your day today?
I started my day in Madoc, Ontario.
Which is where you live.
Which is where I live,
And you drove to Ottawa?
Drove to Ottawa,
and
had some
flew in
meetings.
here to be with us.
And flew in here, yes.
So we're really grateful for that.
No,
How many
thank
kids
you.
you got in hockey?
I have 3 kids in hockey. My son is 13, another son is 11, and my daughter is 8.
And how old were they when they started?
Like me, they were around 2 when they started actually skating, and then I think probably 3.5, 4 was when they stared in the intro program.
So they've been at it for a while now?
Yes, we all have been at it for a while.
Okay.
Yes.
You started CanadianHockeyMoms.ca. How come?
When my kids started getting into rep hockey, and I had grown up at the rink as a figure skater, and my parents both served time on executive and as presidents of minor hockey. My brother played. I've always been fascinated with the culture, and then once I got into it, I realized as a rational person, I feel like I'm a rational person, but you start having these questions about both experiences and your reactions to them. And I really wanted to understand a little more about that. Looked around, there were not really any resources for me or other moms like me with a background in community development. I was curious to see if I could build a community of hockey moms, and so I started out the website.
And how's your community doing?
I think we're around 30,000 now. We're about 26,000 on Facebook and more on Twitter and other avenues, and we have some pretty great conversations.
About what?
Well, lots of different topics. People will typically ask questions, and then I'll post them, and I don't usually give advice. I don't feel like I'm the person to give advice, but there are lots of other people with experience. So it could be anything around equipment costs, safety, some general organizational things that every mom has to face or every family faces, and then something that I'll capture as very loosely as politics and hockey. Lots of questions
of
around
which
that.
there may be a bit.
There might be.
There might be.
Yeah.
More to come on that.
Yeah.
Michael, you did a series in the National Post about this not too long ago, and I wonder, having done the series, whether you come away from it with what feeling?
You know, it's funny because my kids are too young to be playing hockey right now, and I'm not quite at that stage, but it was almost an eye-opening experience for me because I ran into so many different parents and families who would recount just kind of the sacrifices that they would make to have their kid A, play hockey, and then B, keep up with the Joneses. I think the number one fear for parents is that we're not affording our children the same sort of opportunities that the other kids are having. So just coming away with that is just kind of the amount of sacrifices. And I heard parents taking out RESPs, using that to help fund their kids' hockey development, summer hockey, skills coaches, and just kind of being $100 to death is what one parent said, in just terms of always just wanting to spend that extra little bit to make sure their kid had every opportunity.
Let's share a couple of facts with our audience here. According to a survey by Hockey Canada in the year 2012, 1,300 parents surveyed had an average household income roughly 15% higher than the national median. The majority listed their occupation as, quote, professional, owner, executive, or manager. The Globe and Mail's James Myrtle has described this as a reflection of hockey's new white-collar base. And then, of course, people in this part of the province will remember the longtime Greater Toronto Hockey League president, John Gardner, who once said, "The game has changed in this respect. It used to be that you had a right to play. Now it's, can you afford to pay?" Todd, let's get into this. Has hockey, in your view, become too elitist a sport?
Well, it certainly had a history of some of the things we're talking about in terms of just the cost to play. And I remember as a president of minor hockey here in Calgary that we had many issues with families that were call it being nickel and dime to death or $100 to death or cash called, as it was often referred to inside of some of the teams. Although, I'd also give credit to some of the hockey associations that were taking a different perspective on that and trying to help govern that, if you will. And, I think there's some other steps that we can take as the responsible custodians of the game that can help families so that it doesn't become cost prohibitive. Let's face it, the game itself has a very costly infrastructure associated with it. I mean, rinks are costly to operate. All the back end items that are required inside the game in terms of just the equipment. So I don't think families should be forced into situations where they're having to go to a bunch of tournaments or, doing a bunch of social activities inside the game outside of just the cost of the game. And I think we can do things internally, as parents to help govern that.
Paul, there's no question this is not like basketball or soccer where you got a ball and sneakers and you're on your way. There is a lot that you have to buy in order to play this game. What can be done to alleviate some of that financial pressure?
Well, those are the challenges that parents face in putting their youngster in any sport. Is really deciding on what their child needs as opposed to what their child may want. And I think that I can recall my own first experience getting equipment for my son when he was 6 and starting to play hockey. And I went to a swap meet. I made the conscious decision to really explore the sport with my son, not really sure whether or not he was going to stick it out. And in those early years, it was more a case of hand-me-downs or going to swap meets or going to sports exchanges. And I'm a hockey dad, so people would say, well, why would you do something like that? And I said, well, what we're trying to do is we're trying to manage an overall family budget. I wanted to create a great experience for my son in sport, but at the same time, there were other things we were doing in our family. So, we were a skiing family. My son played a lot of other sports. My daughter was involved in a number of sports. So, I felt that it was our decision as a family to figure out what it was we were going to pay for. But, to Todd's point about cash calls and how minor hockey associations try to manage those costs, I think it's really important for parents to play a role in that as well. And ask those questions at the beginning of the season in terms of what is this experience going to cost this year, and not be surprised over the course of the year by spontaneous decisions that are made that end up costing families more money than they're prepared to pay.
That's a fair enough point. But Michael, if I understood your series, part of the problem here is parents aren't prepared to have little Johnny or Janie have that second or third hand set of skates now. They want the best skates for their kids starting at a very young age. There's a lot of that happening, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is we're talking about two different kind of experiences. And the one experience is maybe you just want to play house league and you just want to have an introduction to hockey just from a general level. And then the second one is if you've got a kid who has some talent and coaches are saying, hey, this kid can play AAA or AA, and we're talking about tournaments and we're talking about being on a path that other players who've made it to the next level have been on that path, and that path costs a lot of money. There's no way around it. You can't go to a swap meet to go to a skills coach. Can't go to a swap meet to go do hockey tournaments that are going to cost you X number of dollars a month. So at the end of the day, I think we're looking at something where if you're going to be playing hockey at a competitive level, it's around $20,000.
Well, here's the thing. Teresa, let me bring you in on this. Some of our friends watching who don't necessarily follow the NHL as closely as maybe some of us do at this table may not have heard of Matt Duchene. Right. But Matt Duchene is he's a pretty good player for the Colorado Avalanche. He's a star player. His father estimates that over the 13 years that he played minor hockey, his dad spent north of $300,000 getting Matt to where he could get to. Now, in Matt's case, it worked. Matt's making $6 million a year right now, so that family is fine. But it doesn't work out that way for everybody. But is $300,000 representative of what parents are paying in some cases if they think they've got a little tiger by the tail?
I don't know. I guess for Matt, and my kids have both played in the Matt Duchene tournament in Haliburton. They're intense hockey families there, like they are in most of Ontario. I think that those families who are trying to get their kids to the next level, it doesn't surprise me that over the span of his minor hockey career, it doesn't surprise me at all that would be the amount of money, because there are things that add up. Tournaments, you win one tournament, you move on to the next one. There's 3 extra nights in a hotel room, plus meals, plus travel to get there and all the rest of it.
Team jackets, the best equipment, composite hockey sticks.
Yeah, and if you, I asked the question on my Facebook page recently, what do you pay for registration? So across Canada, it ranged from $200 to $3,000 plus plus your fundraising fees, plus. So it really depends on where you are. And $300,000, I can see, not for everybody, but for those people who are going for the extra camps or the extra ice time and traveling and joining the special teams, the select teams, I think it doesn't surprise me.
Have you done your family budget on how much you spend on your 3 kids per year for hockey?
Well, I have done that. I will say that last year, with both kids, both of my boys making it to the finals in All-Ontario and both winning regional silver stick and going to international, we were in hotels 32 nights for hockey. We're able to share that with another family, so you would bunk up with someone else, but that's an example of the things that happen when you go all the way in playoffs and all the way in international silver stick.
Now, when I played hockey as a kid, never house leagues, never rep, never like a lousy hockey player, I'd spend $5 on a wooden stick.
Yep.
What do you spend now for sticks for your kids?
I don't buy the $300 sticks for my kids
Good for
unless
you.
they're in a clearance bin. But they do have good sticks, but I make sure that I find them on sale and on clearance. So, you know, $100 is not unusual, 120, maybe 150 for my older boy. That's not unusual.
Okay, we just mentioned Matt Duchesne. I want to ask you, Michael, about another hockey player named Glenn Metropolitan. Glenn is 41 now, I guess, but he had a darn good career, grew up in Regent Park, I guess by Toronto standards, lower income neighborhood, had a good career in the NHL, didn't come from an upper middle class family. Can that happen today?
It can happen, but I think the examples are few and far between. And I think that's just the reality of it. Like when I talk to hockey parents and they say, okay, well, Connor McDavid went to a hockey academy and he went to a skills coach and he did this and he did that. And I think that's become almost the part of the development stream now, where kids are saying, if I want to get to that next level, I want to be that player, I have to play hockey 12 months a year. I have to go to this level, I have to go to that level. And if you're not willing to go to that level, it's not to say that talent can't get you there, but if you're comparing apples versus oranges and both are doing that, suffice to say, you're giving yourself the best chance. And I think it's almost, you're going against the odds if you're going to do the Glenn Metropolitan way of kind of getting by your almost bootstraps.
But again, Paul, you know, for those of us who recall hockey of a certain vintage, you know, we've got this image of Wayne Gretzky shooting pucks against his barn in Brantford with his dad watching him, and that just doesn't happen anymore, right? Right now you've got to come up through a kind of or I should ask you, do you have to now come up through a kind of a professionalized feeder system? And the days of sort of working it out on the pond in the backyard, those days are gone.
I don't believe those days are gone, and I don't believe that's the only avenue for top players. First, I have to point out that Hockey Canada's role is not to produce NHL players. It's not to produce young ladies to play on our national team. It's to create an experience in hockey that meets the needs of a very broad base of membership. You know, ultimately, families will make decisions to access those types of resources for their children. But I think you also have to look at the demographics across Canada. There are youngsters from smaller communities who, if there is a sense that there's talent there and the families want to pursue more expensive options for those children, oftentimes it might mean even leaving home at a younger age at 14, 15, or 16 to attend a program that would give them more enhanced training. But I also believe that you really have to figure out what the opportunities are you're looking for sport. And, you know, I used the example earlier about the swap meets when my son was younger. I can assure you when he was playing Bantam and Midget AAA, I wasn't going to swap meets, but I certainly wasn't spending $20,000 a year either. And I think the reality is that, you know, we have to look at what each family's situation is, the decisions that they make. I certainly applaud Teresa for, you know, her comment about, you know, there are cheaper options. Not everybody in the minor hockey system is using a $300 hockey stick or wearing the best pair of skates. So,
okay, glad to hear that.
Look at the chemistry in this game. Look at the landscape. Determine, you know, what you know. We're talking about a lot of players that are from, you know, the sort of that greater Toronto area. You need to look at players in Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Saskatoon, Regina. even on the East Coast, and the types of environments those youngsters grow up in. Sure. Are the ponds still there? Absolutely. Are kids out on weekends enjoying some unstructured play? I think so. I think it's less and less, but you know, that it just seems that we're losing sight of the ability to create great experiences for a very broad range of youngsters, because we spend a lot of time focusing on that elite stream. And you know, if you look at
okay, let me get another angle in here as well. And to do that, I want to quote, Todd, this will be for you. I want to quote the greatest defenseman of all time, who turned 68, incidentally, on the 20th of March. He said, "My mom and dad were perfect minor hockey parents. Their philosophy was, look, go out and play, have fun, let's see what happens. And I wish there were more parents that thought like that when it came to their kids playing hockey. It was never a job for me. That's what these kids have to understand. Just enjoy it. Keep that love and passion for the game." I think that's what sometimes we do, the coaches and the parents. We suck the love and passion from our kids, and I think that's wrong. Todd, I wonder whether you're seeing what Bobby Orr saw.
Listen, those are great words. Those are, I mean, obviously he's a great person as well, and I think that's what parents should be living by. I think there's another issue that's going on here, and that is the marketing machine behind hockey and the business of hockey. And I'm not talking about Hockey Canada here, or I'm not talking about minor hockey associations. I'm talking about business capitalizing on parents. And I mean, I saw it as the minor hockey president, where you had the spring leagues coming into the rinks promising all kinds of things to these kids. And you know, probably one of the first questions is, can your mom and dad afford to continue to put you in hockey? And again, my impression here is that parents need to take on the responsibility. I've been a big advocate of this all the way through my 7 years on the board, plus you know, obviously all the years that my son was in hockey. We, as the adults of this game, need to be the custodians of the game and take the responsibility and start controlling some of these issues. And it's out of control with respect to spending. And I think parents are being intimidated by other parents. They're being embarrassed. They think they have to do these things, and just as Bobby Orr says, you don't. And I think you should get back to basics.
Todd, let me follow with this, because I'm curious about the title of your book, Moron, the behind-the-scenes story of minor hockey. Who are the morons?
Well, look, the title really comes from actually my resignation, which really came from the moronic behavior of a bunch of adults in terms of contentious issues that during my reign as minor hockey president we were dealing with. Things like pee-wee body checking, you know, the respect behind the glass issues, where we had, you know, kind of bullying and all kinds of issues going on with parents. And from my reign, we were desperately trying to tackle, you know, 6 major issues, and I've mentioned a couple of them there. And from that, you know, I penned out the book and the title. And although the title seems a little aggressive, it was intended to keep the conversation going, intended to keep conversations alive around the behaviors from adults inside this game. Not to mention, you know, this feeling that they got to spend, you know, unusually high amounts of funds to keep their kid in the game, all the way from their own behavior behind the glass and being more respectful. And I think we've kept that conversation alive as a result of conversations like this.
Okay, I got to ask you, how much bad behavior by parents do you see when you take your kids to the rink?
I have seen some behavior. Yes, definitely. It depends on the intensity of the game often.
What's the worst thing you've seen?
Oh, the worst thing I've seen. I've seen probably a lot of the things that are in the book Moron, for sure. I think I would admit to getting into it with another fan last year after my son was cross-checked and hurt in front of the ice, and as the parent was going out during intermission, informed me that it was an embarrassment. Our team's an embarrassment, and it's an embarrassment out there, as he yelled "actor" out at my son. And I think I might have stood up at that point and maybe challenged him that he was the embarrassment, that maybe the children were 10 years old. And
this was a parent from the other team?
It was a parent from the other team. And I said, if you want to yell at me, I can take it, but these are children. And as he walked out, he gave me the finger without turning back and looking. So that type of things happens, and I'm a rational parent and don't yell too much back. So I think that I handled that quite well. And then I laughed about it. What else can you do? But he stayed. He was there for the next period. And we won.
which you were happy about at the end of the day.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay, at the risk of asking a politically incorrect question here, who's worse, mums or dads?
I think that there are equally bad moments for both. I don't know that I can say one way or the other. I've seen moms get into it. I've seen dads get into it. I've seen moms get into it with dads. I've seen a lot of yelling at refs, often by dads. The only real threats that I've seen on coaches have been from dads. So, you know, I think that we each have our strengths and weaknesses in that area.
Is it more obstreperous in boys hockey or girls hockey?
I don't have experience so much with girls hockey leagues because my daughter plays on a boys team, although I would challenge to say that it's boys. There are 6 girls on it as well. I'm not sure. I think there's probably room for confrontations and conflict in both, knowing the intensity of the game.
Does all of this happen, Michael, because we have too deep a love and an interest in trying to see that our kids become NHL players someday, and therefore we go to the wall?
I think that's part of it. I think part of it is if your child wants to, or is passionate about hockey or whatever the sport or activity is, we just want to foster that as much as possible. But I think there comes a time where parents have invested X number of dollars and we say, okay, we've already done enough where we think that we should get something out of it. And whether it's getting that kid to the next level, whether it's major, junior, or a college scholarship, I think we want to see the child get something out of it. And once you invest a certain amount of money, I think you're in too deep at that point. And that's where the pressure gets shifted from the parent financially onto the child, saying, I've got to live up to all the money that my parents have spent on this.
Apologies for quoting one of your competitors here, but here's James Myrtle in the Globe and Mail, who wrote a couple of years ago, "It's getting totally out of control," says Derek Popke, who deals with overzealous parents dreaming of their children making the NHL as the president of Vancouver Hockey School. Quote, "It's a crazy world, it's professionalized, and I think this really has to come to people's attention that it has to be dialed back. Everything." Okay, Michael, you got any ideas about how to dial it down a bit?
You cannot put that genie back in the bottle. I think it's impossible right at this stage right now. And I think it's not just hockey, I think it's everything in our society. You look at how much dance lessons cost, you look at gymnastics, it's not just hockey. I think if you have a child, boy or girl, that's into something and passionate about something, you want to spend as much as possible to make sure that that comes to fruition.
I get that, but Paul, I mean, part of the problem is I know we're losing kids to this who want to play this game, who are at one time might have wanted to play this game, but quit the game because their parents are too badly behaved at the rink, and it's all become far too, as the quote from Myrtle suggests, too professionalized and too intense. You see that too, I presume, don't you?
No question. I believe that is one of the dangers, and I appreciate what Michael is saying about society in general, and it's not just limited to sports, it's also in the arts. And the challenge is that early specialization in a particular sport or a particular arts area, if kids are that focused in that area, I'm just concerned that we lose the opportunity to see what potential is in that child in sport if they don't have a broader base of developing their athletic abilities, of developing their social skill set. I just worry that when we lose kids at 13, 14, 15, 2 things happen. They don't return to sport, and it's likely that their own children may not return to that sport.
So you've lost them for a couple of generations, and maybe, who knows?
Yes.
Maybe beyond that. Let's hear from, I think, probably the most thoughtful guy ever to play professional sports. Here's Ken Dryden, Hall of Famer, who said it is in free time that the special player develops, not in the competitive expedience of games, in hour-long practices once a week, in mechanical devotion to packaged, processed, coaching manual, hockey school skills. Teresa, he always thought it was important, and I know I've heard Wayne Gretzky talk about this too. I mean, the great one played baseball in the summertime. He didn't play hockey 12 months a year. I don't want to get too personal here, but how does it work in your household? Are your guys playing hockey all year long?
No, not all year long. And actually, some of the most fun they have is when they try to make a rink in the backyard or go down to the lake. But those times are less and less now because the winter, it just doesn't seem like there's that much time. For my family in particular, we do a couple spring tournaments for my one son with the tournament team that's been around for a long time, and then the rest of the summer is baseball, soccer, football. But I do know that I've asked the question before of the moms, and what do you do? What are your off-season sports? What do you do in the off-season? And a lot of them will respond, what off-season? There's no off-season.
There's no off-season.
Right.
It's hockey 12 months a year.
That's right.
Todd, would you agree you got to get away from the game for a little bit in order to truly appreciate it?
No, absolutely. You know, I think there's all kinds of documentation that would support the notion of diversifying the skills and talents, and as Paul's referencing, you know, even the social skills of getting your children involved with other things. Certainly, when my son was growing up, you know, we always took the downtime and said, you know, and he did very well in hockey, but we recognized that there was other things, other interests, and I would be encouraging all parents to, you know, lay down the hockey equipment and go encourage your children to get involved with something else, or quite frankly, maybe just take the summer off and enjoy some leisure time.
Have you, Teresa, heard from hockey moms or dads whose kids have quit, and what explanations did they give you as to why that's happened?
I've asked that question before, why people quit. A lot of people around, once they enter high school, might end up finding jobs or finding other opportunities or things they want to do. They have more opportunities with different sports as well, high school sports. But when I asked my own kids why people quit around that age, they said coaches, actually. And what does that, I asked them, I kind of probed into a bit, what does that mean? And I think around certain ages, it's not worth it in competitive sports for kids to put in the intensity and the long hours that they do to sit on the bench. So that becomes a whole issue for kids, the whole playing time issue, and also they just start realizing that there are other opportunities out there for them.
What do we do? That's a good question. Michael, what do we do about the coach who's 35 years old and already trying to burnish his one-loss record by sitting on the bench, the kids who aren't as good, and playing too much, the kids who obviously are better, and all he's worried about is his one-loss record, not whether his kids are having a good time?
It's a difficult situation because I think a lot of those kids are trying to get to a next level and they're trying to learn the so-called fundamentals and maybe system work, and there's other kids that just probably just want to keep playing and extending their hockey career. So I don't know how you can solve it aside from the fact that, okay, if you're not going to take it that seriously, we'll play house league, play another level where maybe the coach is just a parent who's volunteering versus a guy that is concerned about his one-loss record, and maybe the coach is trying to get to the next level. So it's a difficult scenario because there's a lot of kids there are taking it very seriously. They're treating it like a job and treating it as such that they're trying to make something of it, whether it's getting a free scholarship, a free ride, or they just want to play as high-level hockey as possible. In
our last few minutes here, let's, well, we got to quote the great one at least once in this program, don't we? Here we go. Here's Wayne. I was absolutely ecstatic to see the end of hockey season. This is Gretzky saying this. Ecstatic to see the end of hockey season. One of the worst things to happen to the game, in my opinion, has been year-round hockey, and in particular, summer hockey. All it does for kids, as far as I can tell, is keep them out of sports they should be doing in the warmer weather. Paul, what do we do about this?
We listen to what he has to say. We listen to what Bobby Orr has to say. I think that the Ken Drydens, the Bobby Orrs, and Wayne Gretzkys of the world have so much wisdom and knowledge to share with us about their own experiences growing up. And I think it's parent education. So, for example, we really need. Michael just talked about the fact that we measure a coach's ability based on wins and losses, and that's parents as well saying, well, he's not a very good coach. Last year's team, he was 5-20. If we can look at the ways we measure success based on kids developing their skills, kids enjoying their season, it is a concern for me that kids would quit the sport because the coach sucks the life out of the experience. And so, what I do want to see happen is multi-sport experiences. I want to see kids involved in other sporting activities. And I think we just have to continue to promote that message through means like this. There's no question that the media can be a great supporter of how we get that messaging out. I think it's critical that parents understand that those are good choices for their children.
Teresa, let me give you the last word on, now that you've looked at this so much, you've got the website going, you hear from tens of thousands of parents. Give us one idea that might help improve things.
Well, I guess from a parenting perspective, something that's always helped me is to think about when I get upset about things, or if I'm really intense about my kid and want my kid to do something, is that about me or is that about my kid? Is that really about my kid? And maybe taking one step back and trying to figure out whose dream it really is important. And also just giving them unstructured time to play the game that they love, because I've heard it said many times, the best part of practice is getting out there before the coaches start anything structured. So giving kids those opportunities are important too.
That is so smart, so wise. Great discussion, everybody. Thanks for everybody's joining us on TVO tonight. Todd Miller in Calgary, Paul Carson in Calgary. Good to have you guys on the line from Alberta. And Teresa Dosteler, can't thank you enough for making the big trek in from Madoc and Ottawa today. And Michael Tracos of Post Media News. Thanks so much, everybody.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.